Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Aren't you excited to be here? Well, welcome to the Joint Committee on Housing's public hearing. I'm Linda Dorsina-Forey. I'm the Senate Chair. And sitting to my left is my co-chair, House Chairman Kevin Honan, who's here with us as well. I want to thank the members for coming, and we will introduce them. Also joining us today is, okay, here we go, Representative Joe McGonigal. Thank you, Joe.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative David DeCosta.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Representative Jeffrey Deal.
Thank you.
So again, we welcome you all today. We are going to be hearing testimony on 38 bills related to Chapter 40B. If you are here to testify and have not already registered, please fill out a sign-in sheet and let us know that's located outside the room that you want to testify. Today we'll be hearing testimony in the order that people signed up, and we ask that you please limit your testimony to 3 minutes. 3 minutes each. The committee welcomes written testimony as well, which you may leave with committee staff. And these TVs will display the name of the person currently testifying before us. And as customary, the committee, we will recognize elected officials who come in during the day. And this morning, I want to bring up my colleague, our colleague, Senator Moore, and also Representative King to join us. And, oh, yes.
Good morning, Chair Ford and Chair Honan and members of the Joint Committee. I am joined today by Representative Anna Kane of the 11th District District and Chairman Maura Miller of the Town of Shrewsbury and the Board and Chair of the Board of Selectmen and Shrewsbury Assistant Town Manager Kristen Moss. We are here to testify in support of Senate Bill 711, an act relative to affordable housing in the Town of Shrewsbury. This legislation is a home rule petition filed pursuant to a vote taken by the Shrewsbury Town meeting members on February 25th, 2015. As you are already well aware, the Massachusetts Comprehensive Permit Act, also known as Chapter 40B, encourages the production of affordable housing in all communities throughout our Commonwealth. However, the law does not take into consideration certain types of housing that may already provide affordable options to residents of the community. This bill would simply amend the existing law to enable the Town of Shrewsbury to classify manufactured or mobile homes as affordable housing for 40B purposes. Manufactured homes truly are affordable housing opportunities to many of our constituents. As such, we respectfully request the committee update the existing Chapter 40B provisions to reflect this classification for the Town of Shrewsbury. Representative Kane and I have also submitted written testimony to the committee requesting a favorable report of Senate Bill 711. I would now like to turn to my fellow panelists who offer additional testimony in support of this bill. We would certainly be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. And thank you for the consideration of this legislation. Representative Kane.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for taking us out of order. I think the Senator spoke eloquently about why we're here today. The only thing that I would add is that part of the legislation as it's been filed does indicate that the manufactured homes have been on the same parcel of land for 20 years to be considered low or moderate income. So we're not simply looking at someone coming in and putting something up and declaring that. We're looking at this as really a long-term strategy that we're looking at and an acknowledgement of existing housing stock that is in the Town of Shrewsbury to be counted towards our affordable housing number. So I know that Chairwoman Miller has some comments that she'd like to make, and so that I don't replicate what she's going to say, let me turn it over to her.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Ford, Representative Honan, and members of the panel. I'm here along with Assistant Town Planner Kristen Moss, and we are representing the Shrewsbury Board of Selectmen today to request your support for Senate Bill S711 for the purposes of meeting our 10% mandate of affordable housing under Chapter 40B. The Town of Shrewsbury, as you know, as has been stated, the town meeting approved this on February 25th, 2015. But the Shrewsbury Town Meeting has approved this petition twice previously, and in February voted again to file the petition to request that the existing 40B criteria be adjusted to include the manufactured housing as low and moderate income. I think it's important to note that Shrewsbury allows for all types of housing by right. They're small, we have large single-family homes, garden-style apartments, duplexes, and these approximately 40 manufactured homes that are located along Route 20 and near Lake Quinsigamon in Shrewsbury. For more than 50 years, these homes have offered what is considered safe, appropriate, affordable housing to many of our residents. And that's why we're respectfully asking that you revise the existing 40B criteria to reflect this classification for Shrewsbury. So thank you for this attention to the matter, and again, seek your support for House S711.
This is Kristen Loss, the Assistant Town Manager.
Thank you, Kristen Lassie, Assistant Town Manager. Thank you for having us in, Senator Ford and Representative Ford. We and the town of Shrewsbury have an approved housing production plan, which we locate where we believe that affordable housing should be located within our town in a thoughtful and planned out manner. As Chairwoman Miller stated, these manufactured homes have been in existence, have been an affordable component within the town of Shrewsbury for over 50 years. However, they have not been classified under our state chapter 40B subsidized housing inventory. We're currently at 6.1% and are working very, very carefully and diligently to increase our housing stock. We have several projects in the pipeline that are either 40B projects that are under review, or other projects that are classified under our inclusionary housing bylaw that will provide homes that will classify under the affordable housing component through the chapter 40B law. But again, we seek through this home rule petition to classify these modular mobile homes under the 40B subsidized housing inventory statute for the town of Shrewsbury. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Here's a quick question. So the 40 homes, we're saying that's the modular home. This home rule petition is just dealing with those 40 homes in particular, not new modular homes that are going to be popping up in Shrewsbury. So it's more the modular homes that's been there for 20 years or so.
It would allow, so it's for the ones that are existing, and then in the future, I think
If there were other ones in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Oh, there's a question. Okay, wait. Representative Donovan?
To the chair, there's 40 of these homes right now that you're looking at into the planner over there. When you said that, or the rep said that you're gonna have an area that you're gonna designate for 40B, is that gonna enlarge the mobile home area, so that's included?
Several clarifications. I'm the former town planner within the town of Shrewsbury.
And I apologize, she's recently our new assistant town manager.
Oh, okay.
Inadvertently introduced her as my error, and I apologize for that.
So clarifying that the existing 40 modular homes have been in existence for over 50 years in a portion of town that is appropriate for affordable housing.
Okay.
We do have other areas within the town of Shrewsbury that are currently being permitted or have been permitted for affordable housing under the chapter 40B statute.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Costa.
And I would welcome this bill, and I strongly support it. I would just simply point out that also, one argument you did make is that the per square foot cost to rent or own of the types of buildings that you're talking about are truly the most affordable, Madam Chairwoman. They run about 1/3 to 1/4 of the next higher ones, which are the type of 2 and 3 and 4 families that we might be familiar with. If you look at industry standards. So your bill will truly meet the criteria of affordable. As a matter of fact, it will be quite under affordable. And the initiative is terrific, and I appreciate the fact that you folks have taken the effort to get it in front of this committee.
Thank you. And I think it's good to thank you, Representative Costa, and for clarifying as well that it's not just in the low income or the affordable areas that you're creating in Shrewsbury that are not going to be just in this particular section where the 40 modular homes are located. So Shrewsbury is at 6.1%, taking in the 40 units. So if this makes it through the whole nine, what percentage would that bring you up to?
Well, Shrewsbury has over 90% residential component for a population of 36,000 people. So we don't anticipate raising our 6.1% by very much with the 40 added, but through our other planning efforts, we are raising our percentage quite quickly.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Ms. Aguilar.
I'm going to bring up next Jean Panado. Oh, and Joe Flacco.
Good morning, Chairwoman Corey, Chairman Homan, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Jean Panado, and I am the Chair of the Board of Directors of CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. I am joined by my fellow board member, Joe Flatley. CHAPA's mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income households and to foster diverse and sustainable communities through planning and development. CHAPA's 1,500 members represent a broad range of affordable housing stakeholders across the state. We are here today to testify to the importance of the comprehensive permit law, also known as Chapter 40B, or the Affordable Housing Law, to expand housing opportunities that are affordable to Massachusetts residents. The Affordable Housing Law was enacted to address local zoning and land use restrictions that make it impossible or economically unfeasible to build affordable housing under existing local zoning. The legislation codified the goal of ensuring that each community in the Commonwealth does its fair share to meet the housing needs of its residents. It is a critical piece of the puzzle, along with Chapter 40T, Chapter 40R, and many other initiatives that this committee has spearheaded and for which we support. Chapter 40B provides critical housing opportunities to households with low and moderate incomes, helps communities to meet their legal fair housing obligations, encourages communities to proactively plan for growth and affordability, and support economic growth. Unfortunately, local barriers to affordable housing still exist in many communities across the Commonwealth today. Large lot zoning, the prohibition of multifamily housing are still widespread and have greatly contributed to Massachusetts' high housing costs, low levels of housing production, and increased sprawl. Despite the Commonwealth's housing challenges, 40B has had many accomplishments. 40B has been a necessary tool to create mixed-income housing outside of our largest cities. Nearly 60,000 homes have been created across the state in urban, suburban, and rural areas. Over 43,000 are apartments, and more than 16,000 are home ownership units. 31,000 of these homes are reserved for low and moderate income households. Most, but not all, of the market rate homes also provide affordable options that are otherwise scarce in the housing market. In the last decade, communities across the Commonwealth have made significant progress adding affordable housing options to their neighborhoods. In 2001, 27 communities had met their 10% goal and could reject comprehensive permit applications without appeal. Today, 53 communities exceed that goal. Furthermore, the number of communities with a subsidized housing inventory between 8 and 10% rose from 17 in 2001 to 38 in January 2016, based on notifications to DHCD. Many communities report every 2 years, and more communities are likely to have reached this threshold. 172 communities are now at 5% or higher, up from 117 communities in 2001, a 47% increase. These are 172 communities housed 81% of the state's population in 2010. While these statistics are impressive, the most significant piece of data that supports the need for Chapter 40B is that over the past decade, nearly 80% of all new housing outside of cities is a direct result of Chapter 40B. It is important to note that for communities facing challenges in making 10% of their housing stock affordable, there are tools available to them to help them control their destiny. DHCD's Housing Production Plan regulation gives the most direct tool for municipalities to control where affordable housing development takes place. Housing production plans help communities to direct where development happens and create a mechanism for the community to be appeal-proof for 1 or 2 years if they achieve certain affordable housing production levels in a calendar year, even though they are below the 10% on the subsidized housing inventory. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Joe Flatley. I'm with Gene, and I'm on the board of directors of CHAPA and Pasco CHAPA. We do have written testimony which we submitted to the committee. I think we just want to highlight points. Despite Chapter 40B's success and DHCD's regulatory changes meant to help communities provide housing options to families across all income levels, there's much more work to do. In Massachusetts, restricted local zoning and limited permitting have created a supply-demand mismatch. And consequently, housing prices are high and the housing market cannot respond to growth quickly enough. MEPC reports that Massachusetts needs 17,000 new homes built each year, with the majority being multifamily housing, in order to maintain our current job base. We're limiting economic growth by constraining our housing supply. Our housing shortage impacts households across all income levels. As housing prices rise, more households are forced to stay in the rental market, and many younger workers that would have tried to become homeowners in the past remain in the rental market because they're unable to come up with a down payment and have trouble obtaining financing as they carry large amounts of student loan debt. As more households look for rental options, the vacancy rate for Boston area apartments has dropped to 2.6% in the second quarter of the year, less than half of the 5.5% vacancy rate normally associated with Greater Boston with stable rents. This makes the Boston area one of the most expensive rental markets in the country. The primary reason for our constrained housing supply is that outside of urban areas, multifamily rental housing opportunities are scarce, and the limited options that exist were mostly built in recent years with the comprehensive permit law. Chapter 40B has withstood the test of time. The law continues to produce housing and support economic growth. Changes have been made to the law over time through regulation and guidelines issued by DHCD, and it's our recommendation that any additional changes be brought to DHCD for consideration. Some of the changes made in recent years, including reduce the amount of affordable units communities must produce each year to reject comprehensive permit applications, enhance requirements for project design, including building massing, topography, environmental resources, and solving past ambiguities regarding profit limitations and cost certifications. The changes to 40B through guidelines and regulations show that the law is responsive to local government action. In 2011, for example, Mass Housing rejected the site eligibility in North Reading, where the town had proactively zoned and built affordable housing through Chapter 40R. Developers know that the comprehensive permit law is not the right option, and communities made other prompt and predictable permitting options available to build affordable rental housing, even when the community is under the 10% threshold. For communities that have not done a fair share of affordable housing production and do not have this type of zoning permitting in place, the law is an effective remedy. It's important to recognize that for all 40B successes in producing housing, Chapter 40B alone cannot meet all of the state's housing needs. Together with Chapter 40R, the Community Preservation Act, and local tools, the state has the ability to produce more housing. However, despite all these excellent tools, our housing shortage grows. The biggest barrier to Massachusetts meeting our housing needs and growing our economy is the lack of zoning for multifamily housing. CHAPA stands ready to assist the Housing Committee in reporting on a strong housing production bill that requires multifamily housing zoning in every community. CHAPA also encourages committee members to support Senate 122 zoning reform legislation currently before the Committee on Community Development and Small Business. Preserving Chapter 40B, requiring multifamily zoning in every community across the state, and zoning reform together with local tools available to all communities will equip the Commonwealth to meet our housing challenges and grow our economy.
Thank you, John. Any questions? Thank you, Georgie.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to bring up Rep. DeCoste. With Ellen Eileen. Ellen Eileen.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, thank you for taking this turn. I will be brief. I will just speak, first of all, I want to introduce the Vice Chair, former Chairman of the Norwell Board of Selectmen, who has got a lot of experience dealing with 40Bs in our town, both as a member of the Board of Selectmen, prior to that, a member of the Advisory Board. I will speak briefly regarding our bill and also speaking in favor of H1103, which is fielded by my colleague, Representative from Warren. And in both cases, I would characterize this bill as a fair count bill. And harkening back to the representative from Shrewsbury, what we're asking the committee to do is to take a look at whether or not we're getting a fair count to begin with. in terms of actual low-income housing units. Manufactured housing, as of now, is not counted in the overall count, and yet it is the most cost-effective means of living in communities, at least in the suburbs, the communities I represent. On average, it costs about 1/3 of the next higher alternative, which is again multifamily housing, 1/3 per square foot, 1/3 as much per square foot as in a multifamily. And in many cases, it allows individuals to sell their homes, older families to sell their homes, move into these communities where they're very happy. I can give you examples where I am from, where they live in gated communities, in manufactured housing with neighbors that they've known with, proximate to the housing, to the churches, to the social organizations they've been going to their entire lives, and also proximate to their families that they go out with grandchildren and so forth. So I would ask some consideration for both my bill 1091 and bill H1103, Representative Burke. I will turn it over. I probably should have let Alan speak first, but I'll turn it over to Mrs. Allen.
Thank you, Representative DeCosta, and thank you all for letting me speak for a few minutes. This has been a real problem in our community, and we've been working very hard to address it, but we have some different challenges than some of the other communities in the state. And I do take exception to some of the testimony from CHAPA, or at least would like to offer some different data. It was reported last year that since 2007, homelessness has declined 9% nationally, while in Massachusetts it has increased 25%. To me, this suggests that 40B isn't working as well as it could. In the suburbs, it's very different than in the urban communities or even the larger suburban communities. We have under 11,000 people. We have a rural community, we have very high water table. We have 1 acre zoning, not because we're snobs, but because we only have septic, and that's what you need to not put, to make it work. Some of the challenges and disappointments we had in trying to pursue our 10% under our affordable housing plan, which we do have one. And just give you a few examples. We have one 40B proposal where the developer acknowledged at the Housing Appeals Committee that their plan would put raw sewage on the road. And this was approved because they were going to figure it out. That's a reflection of our water table issues and our need for septic systems. Some other challenges for us. We have no public transportation. We have almost no sidewalks. The few we have that are near the grocery stores and the doctor's offices and so on are the manufactured homes that have been there for decades, that are truly affordable. Down the street from those, we have some very small cabin-like homes, and they were torn down by a developer to build a 40B, which is a luxury condominium complex. So it brings down our inventory, it takes away our affordable housing, but it needs that little tiny percentage. So we moved backwards instead of forwards. And the last time we tried to let one of those units be, one of the affordable units was turning over, no one came in and applied because they didn't have the right mix of assets to purchase and income low enough to qualify. So in a nutshell, we need some approaches that work in a different type of community where we're not getting any of the benefits of the state helping, say, a gateway city. And we would welcome the ability to have some flexibility like this where we can make it work so that we can help out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, then we have Representative Susan Baker.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for taking me out of turn. I appreciate that. I will be brief. My colleague who preceded me and the other person providing testimony covered a lot of things that pertain to my bill also, which is House 1103, also an act relative to the definition of low and moderate income housing. For the edification of the members who may be new to the Housing Committee, This is my 7th time before the committee on this bill, trying to include mobile homes in the definition of affordable under Chapter 40B. And why is this important? Thank you for asking. In 2 of the 3 towns that I represent, we'll start with Carver. Carver has 4,380 housing units. 25% of those, or 1,115 of them, are mobile homes. In my town of Wareham, there are 1,050 mobile homes, which constitutes 9% of the total housing units in the town of Wareham. Now, I can tell you, and most of you probably know, that mobile and manufactured homes are an affordable alternative to conventional housing. And just this morning, for instance, I'll just give you an example of that. Brand new mobile home, $83,900. Another home, list price, $119,900. $79,500, $79,500, $76,900, $65,000, $59,900, $49,900, and it goes down from there, believe it or not, to $25,000 for a single-family mobile home. For those of you who may not be aware, back in 2004, under the guidance and leadership of Chairman Honan, the House was able to formulate and pass a comprehensive housing reform bill. And in that bill, we were able to include a provision that would allow towns such as mine in Carver and Wareham to count a flat 50% of their mobile homes toward their affordable housing stock. And that would have put my town of Wareham over the cap. I believe at the time it was 11%, and Carver was just below the 10%. But again, for the 2 towns, Carver is a town without a lot of infrastructure. Again, no public water, no public sewer, and no public transportation. Wareham, however, is the opposite. Good infrastructure, attractive target for 40B developers. But the 40B developers, again, I'm not going to restate the point of the way that they can get around the zoning and conservation rules and regs. It puts a burden on the residents of the town and the taxpayers of the town to make up that extra that 40B projects bring in. And the other issue with the 40B projects is when you have many more market rate units as opposed to affordable units, you never, it's a formula for disaster. You can never reach the goal of bringing up, when you're adding that many more overall housing units into the mix, the small portion of affordable units that come with a 40B development the numbers just don't add up. So again, I'm asking for your consideration to try to move this bill out so we can have a debate on the House floor and work towards some meaningful reforms that work for the rural communities and have no effect literally on the larger urban communities, which the intent of 40B at the time was a good one. But right now, it's in need of some changes. So I thank the committee for your time and attention, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you,
Questions?
sir.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too. Want to bring up Andrew Ford and David Bryant?
Madam Chair, thank you, members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of the Chapter 40B affordable housing law. My name is Andrew Spofford. I'm Chief Boston, and we have either developed or preserved roughly 3,000 units of affordable housing in Massachusetts and 18 different towns across the state. I'm here to testify today to the critical role that 40B plays in the work we all do to provide affordable housing for low and moderate income households in the state. As you've heard already from other folks testifying, the role of the 40B statute really is the foundation of a lot of the work we do, especially outside of the big cities in the state to provide affordable housing. As you've heard, we have a severe shortage of affordable housing for households under 80% of median income, which is the group targeted by 40B. Did some looking earlier this week, and Zillow says that the state's current median rent for a two-bedroom unit is $2,100. In order to afford that rent, you have to make well above the state's median income of roughly 120 or 130% of the state's median income is required in order to pay median rent. And the result of that disconnect is that we have hundreds of thousands of families and senior households that need affordable housing and can't get it. So we just have this huge gap of affordable housing, and it's growing every year. At POA, we know that we have more than 4,000 people on our wait list for properties in just in Massachusetts. That's roughly 1.3 households for every unit that we have. And at our normal rates of turnover, that's a 10+ year wait for a unit. And I think that's not typical for other operators in the state. And the result is that people pay more than they can afford in order to secure a housing unit. And people between 50 and 80% of the median income, almost half of those people are paying more than they can afford for their housing. 3/4 of people who make less than 50% of AMI pay more than they can afford for housing, and those people are, as a result, they're skimping on other necessities, on food, on medication, on investments in their future, and so that's bad for those families, it's bad for the state. And as you've heard, that this also has wider economic impact. It's driving away the kinds of workers that we want to keep in Massachusetts. A recent study called Unlocking the Commonwealth that MHP and some others did showed that we have net population outflows especially of innovation workers to our competing economies in Seattle, and Portland, and Austin, places like that. And housing shortages play a big role in that failure, something we need to correct. As you heard from the JAPA testimony, 40B is probably the single most significant producer of housing, especially outside the big cities, outside of Boston and some of the other cities. And that's certainly been POA's experience as a developer. We've worked with a lot of times, especially on Cape Cod, towns that are working with 40B, with 40R, and that the system that the PHCD has created for housing production plans to really plan proactively and produce appropriate scaled housing at a manageable pace for their towns. It really is possible, and lots of towns are doing it. We've worked with several of them. This summer we completed a project called Meltec Farm in Dennis, which is a low-density community on the Cape that everyone's familiar with. That project is not served by town sewer, but it is multifamily with septic, at an appropriate, attractive scale. It's extremely energy efficient, and it really is something that the town came together to support. And it wasn't permitted through 40B, but I think 40B provides the sort of structure of incentives along with some of the other tools that the legislature and PHCD have provided to make housing possible. We've also worked in Bourne, with the town of Bourne, to do what's referred to as a friendly 40B, a project that the town has for and secure the development and then permitted through the comprehensive permit process, because that was the best tool to secure good multifamily mixed income development. So this is a successful program, it's a very important program. We appreciate the work you've all done to make a strong law and preserve its strength and effectiveness, and we hope you'll continue to do that. Thank you. That answers your question.
Thank you, Andrew.
Chairwoman Forey, Chairman Conan, distinguished members of the committee, dedicated and diligent staff. My name is David Bryant. I am the Director of JVC is an association of mission-driven community development organizations dedicated to working together and with others to create opportunities for people with diverse incomes and backgrounds to access housing that is affordable, to benefit from economic opportunities, and to fully participate in civic life of their communities. On behalf of our member organizations, I am testifying to the importance of the comprehensive permit law, also known as Chapter 40B or the Affordable Housing Law, to expanding affordable housing options for Massachusetts residents. Chapter 40B is an important tool for overcoming disparate impact policies and for affirmatively furthering fair housing by overcoming exclusionary zoning practices that drive up housing costs, limit the rental housing supply, favor age-restricted housing over housing for families with children, and limit the supply of accessible housing. Chapter 40B has been an important producer of housing that expands options for low and moderate income families. Massachusetts, as you've heard, needs 17,000 new homes per year for roughly the next 25 years to meet housing demand and sustain our economy. MACDC members work with local residents to create and preserve housing that improves local neighborhoods and contributes to the state's overall need for more housing, in particular, more housing that is affordable for people of modest means. Earlier in this legislative session, MACDC testified in support of bills that would spur greater housing production and legislation to overhaul and update our state's dated and confusing planning and zoning laws. In particular, S-122, an act promoting the planning and development of sustainable communities, presents a balanced, well-crafted approach that offers greater certainty and predictability for developers and property owners, enhanced protections for important natural and agricultural landscapes, and an enhanced set of tools and incentives for local officials and citizens to guide and shape the future of their communities. Massachusetts, and in particular the greater Boston region, will undergo dramatic changes in population over the next 25 years. More than 1 million workers will retire during this time, and we will need to attract younger workers from other places to sustain and grow our economy. With this shift in demographics and housing needs, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council and other experts suggest we need to build 100,000 new units between 2010 and 2040. 87% of that projected housing need is in Greater Boston, approximately 2/3 of which should be multifamily. Currently, the supply does not meet demand, and there is no sign that towns are modifying local zoning to permit multifamily housing and to allow the more sustainable rental options that working families and seniors need. Our members understand the challenges presented by our local zoning laws, and we believe additional tools will allow us to do more of these projects with greater efficiency. In the absence of such reforms, the comprehensive permit remains a necessary tool to provide the flexible zoning necessary to build multifamily affordable housing and to diversify our housing options.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Any questions? Thank you so much, appreciate it. Want to recognize Representative Carlos Gonzalez, who's joined us. Thank you, Representative, for being here. Next up, I want to bring up Mike McDonough, the Mass Association of Realtors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Michael McDonough. I am General Counsel with the Mass Association of Realtors, and I would like to offer a few very brief comments in support of 40B. There are a number of bills before the committee today that would amend or change 40B in one way or another. We look forward as an association to working with the committee on a lot of these different ideas. But very simply, the Mass Association of Realtors supports 40B in its current form. Our members, our 20,000 members, live and work in every single city and town in the Commonwealth. I like to think that our members have a good finger on the pulse of how the economy is going, and especially how the housing economy, the housing market is going in the Commonwealth. As other speakers have said this morning, Chapter 40B has been the primary tool for the creation of affordable housing since 1968. Very simply, Massachusetts does have an affordability problem. We have a problem with affordable housing for a variety of different types of individuals, not just for the deep restricted housing, but also for working families, middle-class families. There's, and particularly in the greater Boston area, there is a need for additional housing, and additional housing that can be purchased by these families. Our statistics show that housing prices continue to rise, and they have been for many months. At this point, the housing market is very strong in most areas of the state. But what that means for the average person who's looking for a home is that they need to save more for a down payment, they need to earn more to make those monthly mortgage payments. So we do look forward to working with the committee on a lot of the ideas that are contained in some of the bills that are before the committee. I will say that, from our perspective, a lot of the issues come back to supply and demand. As the previous speaker had indicated, the supply in Massachusetts has a lot to do with the cost of housing, the increased cost. We urge the committee to look to other tools beyond 40B to add to the tool bag for developers when they're looking to add more housing to communities. Our association has filed legislation, and I know other groups have filed legislation that would encourage more communities to add multifamily housing to their community beyond 40B, ways that would encourage communities to develop this housing, and so that 40B would not be the only option that developers need to turn to in order to build this much needed housing in the Commonwealth. So with that, again, I want to reiterate our support as an association for 40B, and I thank you for your time. We'd be happy to try to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions?
What are the tools you're referring to?
One of the tools that we would like the committee to consider is making it easier for communities or developers, frankly, to develop multifamily housing outside of some of our larger cities. We see that there's a great need and a lack of multifamily housing in many of our suburban communities.
Any other questions?
Only because I know you're based down on the South Shore. What is the basis of, when you say there's a shortage of affordable housing, you're going from community to community, correct? But there's plenty of affordable housing when we are on the South Shore in Brockton. There's plenty of single families that are abandoned. And take you down by the Monticello region, by Field Street. Why, just as a matter of concept of affordable housing, when we say that you want more affordable housing, my hometown of Norwell or Cohasset or Marshfield, why should we really worry about that when we know there's plenty of affordable housing over in other communities that are only 12 miles to the west?
I do think, thank you, Representative, I think that every city and town has a unique circumstance. Some cities and towns are indeed more affordable than others. But I would suggest to you that there are a lot of cities and towns in the greater Boston area and some suburban neighborhoods where children who grew up in those homes no longer can afford to live in those homes, where they grew up and went to school, and now they've gone to college and they return, and they simply cannot afford to own a home in those communities, and there's a lot of those communities.
Right, but that's where the concept of moving up. I mean, I'd like to wake up to a sunrise every morning on Jerusalem Road, but I can't afford the $3 million for the house. And if you can't afford to live in some of these communities, maybe the idea is you move to a cheaper area, and someday if you want to, aspire to live in a more expensive area, you save your money and work 70-hour weeks.
Well, I suppose to that I would say that there are certainly some affordable areas outside of Boston, and the farther you get from Boston, maybe the more affordable it does get. Go out to Springfield, you might talk to some of the realtors out there that may have different sets of problems. But I think certain people want to live in certain communities, and maybe they grew up in a community and they want to belong to that community, and they don't want to move to a different community just because because they cannot afford to live there.
But what,
And I'm gonna,
this will be the end, Madam Chairman. What you're really saying is that in some areas the rates of affordability really vary from town to town. But are there any areas where across the board, say within a 12-mile radius, there is no affordable housing? 15-mile radius, can you give me an area in Massachusetts where within 15 miles no affordable housing exists?
I would be happy to look into that and get back to you with that. I don't have the answer.
I think the answer is no, but if you can find an area, a place to the contrary. I think the real debate is that there are some areas that are more expensive than others, and because we have small towns as opposed to say counties in the south, that we're kind of, our mindset is such that, well, there are some rich towns, snobby, there's snob zoning, and we're going to force people to open up the communities. And as Chairman of my board of selectmen and Vice Chairman pointed out, it's just some of the communities just can't afford the types of developments you're talking about. It doesn't make sense in terms of the infrastructure, the sewage, the water, the ability to move around, the public transportation. And yet, in many cases, I can give you examples in all three of the towns I represent. 40B has resulted in developments that are really mismatched to the community. And it really does a disservice not only to the community itself, but to the people who live in these places. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Rep. DePost, and also Michael. So this is a great dialogue, and I think it's important because I think, Rep. DePost kind of talked about, why do we need to create these affordable housing? And so I don't refer to it as affordable housing anymore, Rep. DePost. I say that building housing that people can afford. And I think the piece that is important in all of our communities, there are 351 cities and towns here in the Commonwealth. We have kids, your children, or other folks' children who may have grown up in Weston, right? They got out of college, and they are not making $1 million, right? But they want to live in that community because that's their high school and that's their, that's their heart and soul. But they can't buy an $800,000 home. And so it's how do we create this housing that people can afford? And I think a lot of times when we think of affordable housing, we think of those people, or who are these people coming into these communities? And I think it's important for us to kind of shift that and deconstruct our idea of affordable housing. So I will say that in these communities that are not meeting the 10%, it's not necessarily for strangers coming in, but it's for your children who got out of college or got out of university and doing an MBA and don't have the money to still live next to their parents or their grandparents. Or it's the grandparent or the parent that wants to stay in that community, but you know what? It's too expensive. And I think this is very important because this dialogue is critical because it's talking about, and Ellen kind of touched on this, I think when we talk about 1-acre sites, we don't look at folks, at least I don't, and I'm Boston born and raised, I don't think of you guys as snobs, right? That's just how the zoning is. But it's how do we think creatively? If you could build a single-family mansion on a 1-acre site, that's awesome, right? But there are other folks who may have that acre site, may own another home and say, you know what? I could put a cul-de-sac, on this property in this community. Not high density, and I think this is important too, because in these other communities, we talk about density in affordable housing, but if you're only used to ranches and you're used to mobile homes or like a 2-family and a 3-family, when you think of density, you think of a 12-story building this developer's gonna pop in your community. So how do we start thinking about housing, creating housing that's affordable, thinking of it creatively? It's not those people coming in, it's your people who grew up in those communities, who are low income, who are middle income, and who are high income. And I think that's when we're gonna start shifting the conversation and really saying, how can we house everybody that are born and raised in that particular community? So this is awesome. We gotta continue this dialogue. Rep. Deal.
Can I just thank you, Madam Chairman, and Mr. Dunn, I guess you're the fulcrum for chance for us to have a little debate here on this whole thing. But the point I think Rep. DePost might be making, I have come from the South Shore as well. I just had a chance to run a Senate race, which is Police Broadway, so I had a chance to see housing right at a T-station, that basically commuter rail station that provided a half-an-hour ride in the Broad, and the values of those apartments went basically got to half, if not a third of their original value. value was when they sold at market rate, they're not selling right now. So I do see that in the market rate, as the rep was mentioning, there are homes that are affordable. And then again, I think what I'm talking about here is a law that may not be necessarily adaptable to different communities based on infrastructure or geography, but also not flexible during economic downturns. This law doesn't allow any flexibility. So in the last 10, 15 years in my community, Whitman, that I've grown up in, I represent Abington, Bridgewater, I see a lot of boomerang kids coming to live back in their house. Now that doesn't show up in 40B type statistics, right? For boomerang kids living back in their home with their parents. The other thing too is in-laws. I know that Rep. Gifford's law has the, trying to count the in-laws, but a lot of in-laws are being built to adapt in the suburbs. So we're trying to creatively work within the confines of the geography. For example, Ms. Allen was speaking about in Norwell challenges for water availability. In the town of Hanson, right next door where my wife and I own a business, we had to put a septic in for the company that we own, to the tune of $50,000, $70,000. Now think about the housing cost to put that in. And it's hard to build the affordable housing in some of these communities based on geographic conditions. And then again, the state commitment for infrastructure. As a slight tangent, and I apologize, the speaker, we just passed a law on allowing licenses back to people with drug convictions that weren't motor vehicle related. And the speaker came down to visit in Halifax and was joking about how it's sort of back of the moon to get to the place we were at. And we mentioned there is no ride, there is no buses that take you around. People walk on the sidewalk, on the side of the road in my town, to Abington, East Bridgewater, to get to work sometimes. We don't have a state commitment for infrastructure that supports a lot of what we would need to have this increased capacity for people building low-income homes. It's not that I think any of our towns would say no more low-income homes. It's just that 40B may not be the most flexible law right now to deal with economic times and geography in our region. I think that's the argument.
Thank you, Representative. I think we would allow those comments to suggest that in many cases 40B is sort of the optional last resort. And as I said earlier, we encourage the committee to consider other alternatives, and that 40B is not something that the developer needs to turn to.
So I think it's either adapted or created a release valve for towns that are trying to do their best to meet it. So I don't know. You're saying don't change 40B. We're saying either figure out a change or something else.
This is great conversation, and I think 40B is important, but I see what Representative Deal is saying as well. Infrastructure is critical, right?
Correct.
So how do we make sure that our state, that we as legislators and our administration, the governor is saying we're going to invest in your community to have sidewalks and to make sure that we can do the connectivity piece, which is very important. But also 40B, and I think it's important, we want communities to think of 40B as last resort. So internally, it's planning, right? So as town administrator, board of selectmen, town planners, how can we plan and say, here's a community, here's an area in your neighborhood or in your district, that could use a jump start. And so even in terms of the infrastructure, you're right, because there's septic, but we know there's also the piece where developers come in, they have to put $1 million, in terms of the wastewater and the septic system, but they could only connect one house to that sewer pipe when they spent $1 million to build it, right? So that doesn't make sense. If you're gonna spend $1 million to put that infrastructure in, why is it that only one house can go into that piping when there could be multiple homes? And so this is where we need communities and towns to say, if you're gonna do $1 million of investment in infrastructure, then maybe we can do a little bit of leeway. Instead of saying this is only one house on this property, maybe they could be 4. And again, not high density, but more individual homes or 2-family homes creating a cul-de-sac. So thank you all. Awesome.
Chair?
Yes.
In your experience, some of these cities and towns that don't have the large groups of affordable housing units, like our inner cities. You mentioned Springfield. Springfield has a lot of it, and some of our surrounding neighborhoods don't. And we talk about transportation infrastructure, and it's not equitable transportation. But I would assume that's for people that are potentially low income, right? That in your experience, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody that needs an affordable housing unit may not have an automobile. Just going back to those people, it's like affordable housing. I know in our area it's looked at, well, the poor folks, sometimes minority folks, and it's gonna inundate a city and town. But do you think some of these smaller suburban areas, if you add 10 units of affordable housing, which potentially could be 20 to 30 people, that would disrupt the transportation, that would disrupt the infrastructure, or something like that? And would that meet the sort of the threshold that we're trying to get in some of these suburban areas?
In my experience, I've not seen that type of data where it shows that additional 40B development creates disruption on transportation type systems or, for that matter, school systems. I think taking steps to make sure that 40B is developed closer to transportation centers like train stations makes a whole lot of sense. For that very reason that maybe not everybody will have the ability to get themselves to work or they otherwise would if they were near a transportation center. But I've not seen any data that shows that it's creating some sort of disruptions in transportation or school systems.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions?
I would join with the senator. Thank you for coming. I think one of the big problems we're experiencing in Massachusetts is a very limited number of cities and towns, like 3 or 4, Boston, the greater Boston area, are doing almost 80% of the new housing starts. So I think the effort here is to try to share and understanding septic issues and other issues. We've done our best to address school issues, school cost issues. But as the senator was saying, planning is key, so we look forward to working with municipalities in terms of planning resources. The DHCD might have additional state resources to municipalities that actually take it serious and do expand. Might need more state money for roads, parks, schools. We do want to thank you. You've been the centerpiece of all of this discussion.
Happy to do it anytime.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you again.
Okay, want to bring up the class seat here?
Now that everybody got their question about the system.
You should have saved it for class.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Clark Ziegler. I'm Executive Director of the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. As I think many of you know, MHP has a couple of roles here in the housing world. We were created in 1985 primarily to work cooperatively with cities and towns, with local officials, with selectmen and managers, and so on, to help craft tailored local solutions to meet our needs for affordable housing across the Commonwealth. And of course, that work, we have provided staff assistance, technical assistance for financing in 322 cities and towns. We've also been very involved with Chapter 40B when it became clear a number of years ago that towns were outgunned by proponents of affordable housing and their experts. We crafted a program to provide technical assistance to cities and towns, to zoning boards of appeal, to help them review comprehensive permit applications. And now that has become a program funded by all of the state housing finance agencies through fees charged on new development. And through that program, we've assisted 150 cities and towns reviewing comprehensive permit applications, totaling 287 projects. So we've been very engaged at the local level, trying to make the system work effectively, giving cities and towns the tools they need to respond constructively to housing proposals. We're also a housing finance agency, and we provided more than $1 billion of financing for more than 22,000 rental units across the Commonwealth in 111 cities and towns. I should note that almost half of those, 47 of those 111 cities and towns, needed 40B in order to reduce their rental housing. So 40B is really the central part of this conversation. And I really just want to make 3 brief points today about the bills before you that would amend or repeal Chapter 40B. First is The need for a zoning mechanism like 40B in Massachusetts is as great as ever. You've heard some comments earlier today about housing costs and housing supply. Our home prices in Massachusetts have increased since 1980 more than any other state in the union. The home prices in Massachusetts are 7 times higher than they were in 1980. No other state even comes close. Our rents are also incredibly expensive, also a reflection of the inadequate housing supply. Metro Boston now ranks the 3rd highest rental market in the country, behind only New York City and San Francisco. And this is creating a very substantial competitive disadvantage for the Commonwealth. I testified before the committee previously that we are losing, we're realizing a net loss of population to a number of other parts of the country that have strong innovation economies, that are building more housing, and that have more housing choices at a lower cost, places like Seattle and Portland and Denver. So this is a real competitive issue for the Commonwealth. Despite all of our advantages, our great universities, our great hospitals, our great industries, if this is not an affordable place to live, we can't retain jobs and we can't grow jobs. Second point I would make is that Chapter 40B is an effective law that really works as it was originally intended. The idea is that towns can't simply say no when affordable housing is proposed, but have to engage affordable housing projects on their merits. And part of our work is working, as I mentioned, is working collaboratively with cities and towns. I think we're up to about 35 or 40 communities where we've worked with local officials to produce affordable housing on town-owned land, housing authority sites, and so on. In almost every case where there are locally initiated affordable housing developments, 40B is needed to permit those developments because the town's own zoning would not allow the house to be built. These are projects that selectmen, planning boards, zoning boards all support, but their own local zoning doesn't allow them to go forward, and they need Chapter 40B to get these locally supported projects off the ground and into construction. And that's just a reflection of how restrictive our zoning has become. The last thing I would mention, and again, you've heard this before from a number of people today, I think this is really a symptom of the pressure on 40B, the numbers, the amount of housing that relies on 40B to be permitted is a reflection of how dysfunctional our underlying zoning and planning laws are. We are one of the most restrictive states in the union. We have some of the largest single-family lot sizes in the country. We're about double the national median. There are very, very few buildable sites in the Commonwealth that are zoned for multi-family development, and the net result is very little supply, high housing costs, and a very high reliance on Chapter 40B to get anything built. The real focus, I urge this committee, is on reforming some of those underlying problems with those zoning and planning laws. And in particular, House 1111, introduced by the committee chairs and 23 co-sponsors, would address many of these constraints head-on, including a requirement that every city and town in the Commonwealth make some reasonable accommodation for multifamily housing in their zoning bylaws or zoning ordinance. We recognize every town is different. Housing looks a lot different in Berkshire County or the South Shore than it does inside 128. But we are all in this together. We are all affected as a Commonwealth if we have insufficient housing, if we have stagnant job growth, stagnant state revenue. We're all affected by that, and we all have to be part of the solution. It's clear that housing development of any kind, let alone affordable housing, is rarely going to win a popularity contest at the city or town level. But that's not the basis upon which we should make decisions affecting the future of the Commonwealth. We will fall below our economic potential unless we solve this problem, and I would urge the committee to put all its energy into reporting a strong housing correction bill and making it the high legislative priority of the session. Thanks.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you for your testimony. Just one question. The number of bills here regarding manufactured housing. Should manufactured housing be counted in the inventory?
I think it's a little troubling to us in that for a couple of reasons. One is that housing existed when the law was passed, and keeping a level playing field around how things are counted is really critical to.
Right, and I'm glad you pointed out because it's not being counted now. So the count that you're referencing really isn't an honest count, because if you go into areas around where you've had multifamilies for generations, and the rents are quite affordable, that is reflected in your numbers, is it?
It is not reflected. Well, actually, there's a two-part answer. My understanding of the current subsidized housing inventory counts where there are mobile homes, and there are a number of them, where there are restrictions that limit those mobile homes to folks below moderate income, the number of tenant-owned cooperatives that have restrictions, where those meet the same requirements as other affordable housing in the Commonwealth. They are counted, I believe, in subsidized housing inventory. I think the question is housing that is manufactured housing that has where there's no requirement that be occupied by a low moderate income household does not currently count, and I would argue that is appropriate.
Why would it be that, in fact, when you have manufactured homes, that regardless of whether or not they're available, isn't that what we're gauging, the availability of affordable housing? Why would we want to count those?
Because the premise of Chapter 40B, the rules that have applied to all 351 cities and towns for the entire life of the statute, are that it counts housing that was specifically developed and restricted for low and moderate income occupancy. That was the premise of the law. And consistent with that, mobile homes, manufactured housing that meets that standard is counted toward the 10%.
But de facto, in fact, all of that housing is affordable, isn't it? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my investigation, my research shows me that on average, per square foot costs of affordable housing, of manufactured housing, is about 1/3 to 1/2 of the next highest, which typically is multifamilies, 2, 3, 4 families. So why should we count that, all of that housing, if in fact it is affordable? You say that, well, there's not affordable housing. Well, there is, you're just not counting it.
I mean, I guess I might just have to respectfully disagree with you on that point. I agree that in most cases, manufactured housing is affordable relative to everything else in the market. The issue here is that we have, at a statewide level, at a regional level, like the South Shore as a region, we have a serious housing supply problem, period. Chapter 40B is a way, not the only way, and maybe not the best way to produce additional housing. Frankly, as somebody, I'm from a small town, been very involved in my town government. I would much rather, I've been very involved in getting zoning through town meeting that addresses some of the same concerns, so 40B isn't necessary. That's always my preference. In all of your communities, I would say if there's a way to have zoning that allows single-family homes on modest lots, to the extent possible with Title V, that allows multifamily housing in locations that are suitable and make sense for the communities, that's what this is about. I think we should shift this conversation as much as possible completely away from 40B and talk about what is each city and town doing based on its own circumstances, its own needs, its own market conditions, to provide some additional housing opportunities for folks that are ranging in. That's the discussion we should be having. I think the more we get hung up on the rules, the technical rules about 40B, the less time we're spending on that much more important conversation.
Well, Madam Chairman, I just now believe in the point, but I think the count is wrong. I think in fact we have a lot more affordable housing. If I took you into my district, where those manufactured homes are, I guarantee you won't find many millionaires in those homes. And in fact, the vast majority, probably all of them, are well below the median income in Hanover, Rockland, and Norwalk. In Hanover, in my case, it's Norwalk and Rockland. That's where we have manufactured homes. So I think, as I pointed out, Madam Chairman, this is an oversight law. We're just not counting what is already there. And I think it does a disservice for communities like Rockland, for instance, where there's an enormous amount of affordable housing by any definition. We're just not recognizing. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Thank you for that, so Representative Thomas.
You referred to some of the affluent cities that used geotechnical assistance and worked with the 40B law. Could you name one example of which city or town?
I'll name a bunch of it that have developed on town land using Chapter 40B. Sherburne, Sudbury, Holliston, Acton, Lincoln. There are any number.
one project that added that home. What did that mean to the city of Town?
Typically, the town-initiated projects are smaller, tend to be 20, 25, 30 units, generally not larger than that. They tend to be mostly or all affordable. So that's really, in a lot of ways, the gold standard among smaller communities, suburban communities and smaller towns, is the ability to build neighborhood-scale housing that's less controversial, that's more affordable, that benefits from either donated land or local funding from the Community Preservation Act. That is happening. It's happening in a number of communities in a very successful way. There's just not enough of it to make enough of a difference around the large housing supply problem.
So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that approximately 20 units, 25 units added to a home. And is that one site or is that scattered sites between the cities and towns?
Both. Typically one site, there's a recent project in the town of Sudbury, it's scattered site, it has 30.
And then in your experience, has that meant the immediate needed use of more sidewalks, transportation, disruption of the schools?
In our experience, pretty minimal impact.
Any other questions? Thank you, thank you, Dr. Coast. I know, don't feel discouraged, I know. But I want to thank you, really. This was an important discussion. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
All right, we don't have anyone else signed up, so are there anyone here who would love to testify?